Hey there. Welcome back. You're back at Ground Zero Salem. It's been a minute since I've shot an update, but there's been more important stuff going on in the world other than some dude in his basement talking about metal. And there continues to be. And I continue to support those struggling for change and people who fight for equality in this world. I'm going to leave a bunch of links to movements I support if you want to chip in a couple of bucks, including the new compilation that's on Bindrune, put together by Austin from Panopticon. That being said, we're going to talk about some CDs. Got a couple of shout outs and thank yous before I get into that. First of all, got a new banner design, if you've noticed. It was designed by my friend Mike Tommyrot back home in Syracuse. He's an artist that's done a bunch of my tattoos. He's a tattoo artist as well as art for albums by Marauder, Path of Resistance, his own band Black Sheep Squadron, did some art for Violent Society back in the day, Blank 77, bunch of punk bands, I Object. Great artist. I want to throw him some business. I'm sure he'd appreciate it, so I'll leave a link to his Instagram. Also, I want to thank Alexander, who sent me a VCLT, which I'll be talking about in this update, all the ones that I've listened to and can comment on. Also, a big shout out to Mike from Ontario, who was on the last live stream. And I will leave links for his new channel as well as links for all relevant stuff in here that you may not have heard. In the background, we're listening to Disfigurement from the Atlanta area, I believe. This is on Boris Records. Speaking of VCLT, Matt from the Dark Path sent me a couple of 7 inches, a tape, and this CD. This is my third spin of this, and it's just really great, solid, straightforward, catchy death metal. Everything sounds good, well recorded. Vocals are nice and up front and in your face. There's nothing shadowy or cavernous about it. It's just straight up violent, pissed, and yet somehow hummable death metal stuff from Atlanta, GA. So yeah, stack of CDs, got some VCLT. I decided to take the plunge on a Bridge 9 mystery box of compact discs as well. Those will be in here. Unlike the vinyl box that I got last year, there's a lot of hardcore in here, which is what I want from Bridge 9. A lot of stuff that I missed out on, some stuff that I used to own. The vinyl box I got last year was a lot of like indie and emo leaning sort of stuff, which par for the course. They had their period, that label did, where they put out that kind of stuff, and that's fine. It's just not my thing. I sprung for the CD box because I saw Lonnie's channel and he picked up one of these, and I was like, oh shit. If I get half of that stuff, I'll be happy, because I love a lot of the hardcore that Bridge 9 put out back in the day, and that's what that box is. So, without further ado, we're going to get into talking about Chemical Breath. First up, European band, early to mid-90s. This was re-released by Vic Records. I was really, really impressed by how good this is. I heard about this from Ben Smasher, his channel, and it's just fucking fantastic. Techie thrash death stuff. Reminds me a lot of mid-period death, maybe some Pestilence a little bit later on. Doesn't get boring, doesn't get super proggy and spacey the way death did with Human and Beyond, but the technicality's there. Pretty go for the throat and angry while being technical simultaneously. This is a classic I had to pick up next here. Twilight of the Gods by Bathory. First Bathory I ever heard. Was a little bit weird for me because, you know, it's got these sprawling, epic, melancholic odes to Ragnarok and Odin and shit, and I wasn't expecting that. I knew Bathory was a pioneering black metal band, and they had really abrasive material. It wasn't long after hearing this that I picked up the Jubileum records, and I could kind of connect the dots. I liked it back in the day, but I appreciate it a lot more now. There's a lot of space for the songs to breathe. I really like the acoustic moments. And although in a traditional sense, like Quorthon's not that great of a singer as such, he gets the job done. And there's something really charming in his vocal execution that it totally works for the music. Definitely into it. I haven't explored Bathory past this, shamefully, but I have Blood on Ice arriving soon. I've heard enough friends talk all that stuff up, so I'm looking forward to getting into those records. It's another blast from the past, repurchase kind of deal. Lifetime, Somewhere in the Swamps of Jersey. Classic melodic hardcore from New Jersey. Surprise, surprise. This compiles their 7 inches, some previously unreleased remixes, comp song, and their album Background, which when it first came out on New Age Records, it had really, really bad production. And this is an instance where the band and a producer went in and completely remixed and remastered the whole thing, so it sounds almost like a completely different record. Oddly enough, another New Jersey hardcore band that Lifetime shared members with, Resurrection, did the same thing with their discography, which I'll be mentioning when I do a vinyl update, and it's the same deal. Like, I could never appreciate that Resurrection record back in the day because it sounded so bad, and it sounds so good now. Similar with Background, I really liked Background by Lifetime back in the day, but it was kind of a rough listen because it just sounded like it was recorded under a carpet. Musically, Lifetime is very, very melodic hardcore. Their early stuff wasn't as poppy, definitely like melodic vocals, fast music, a lot of like real sincere emotion behind everything. They got almost more like pop punk later, with like way more hooky, kind of catchy choruses and stuff. This was more like angsty but melodic at the same time, if that makes any sense. You can look to other groups for comparison, like Turning Point, later Up Front, if you know what any of that stuff is. Packaging is really nice with this thing. It comes with this thick book. I actually had this when it came out. This came out on Jade Tree. This reissue came out like 10 years ago or something. The original stuff all came out in the early 90s. Great band. A lot of people like that pop punk stuff. They did a couple albums after this. Jersey's Best Dancers and Hello Bastards. Those are the more like kind of pop punk leaning records. And then some of the members went on to King Dynamite. Yeah. Kid Dynamite after that. And I didn't like that stuff as much. I like this early kind of like angsty, sort of sappy, melodic hardcore shit more. That's just my tastes. One of the B9 records here, Ceremony. Still Nothing Moves You. This was a band I didn't give much of a shot. They were a huge hype band, like in the mid to late 2000s. These guys and Trash Talk and Brace War, all to an extent, were like these kind of bigger hardcore bands that were kind of involving way more speed, almost on a power violence level. They were like hardcore bands, newer hardcore bands with like cleaner production that had blast beats. And at the time I was a snob and I was like, that's not real power violence. I don't think anybody in those bands were trying to be power violence, but when you're younger, you're a dickhead about certain things like that. And I never gave Ceremony too much of a shot, and it's a shame because this record's great. They're doing something much different now that's almost like synthy new wave, I feel like. I heard some of the songs briefly and I was like, wow, that's really good. I gotta pick up that new Ceremony, and I still haven't yet. Probably fitting that I should catch up with the old stuff first. I know there's a record after this called Rohnert Park that's more like, from what I was told, like kind of LA punkish, but I haven't heard that. This is just snarling, pissed, fast hardcore. The vocals are almost like this like pissed, nasally, not super high pitch, but a higher range, kind of almost Ray of Today execution. Kind of reminds me of the singer of one of my favorite hardcore bands from the same period, Cold Sweat. This guy named Sean who sang for Cold Sweat. Kind of a similar vocal delivery to that. But yeah, real fucking angry hardcore stuff. Here's a big one, if you know anything about hardcore in the 2000s. Give Up the Ghost, originally known as American Nightmare, had to change their name. I'm going to try to adjust this light so you get less glare here. Sorry about that, folks. Trying out a new angle, too, by the way, if you haven't noticed. Give Up the Ghost were originally called American Nightmare, have gone back to calling themselves American Nightmare. They had some kind of legal dispute, a cease and desist with a band that nobody had ever heard of called American Nightmare that I think like played like biker bars or something. That American Nightmare broke up and they could take their name back. But this is everything that they recorded in the beginning, year one of American Nightmare. Which includes a couple of 7 inches, some covers, comp stuff, etc. Odds and ends comp, I love them. And their music also is like pretty emotional, really gravel-throated, like gasping for air, just really going for it. kind of fast hardcore behind it. Not all too different from a lot of the kind of Youth Crew stuff, but there's a little bit more punch to it. It's hard to describe, but you can tell that the dudes in the band just definitely mean it. And they, also, if you know anything about hardcore, American Nightmare / Give Up the Ghost kind of like created an entire movement in this music with, the fast, old school style hardcore, quote unquote old school style hardcore at the time, inspired by bands from the late 80s, but with like very sincere kind of poetic lyrics that were heavily influenced and inspired by more like Joy Division and the Smiths and death rock kind of stuff. Great band for sure. Wes, the singer, is a great lyricist. This is my favorite stuff by them. Background music, the first full length after this stuff is also great. Their style changed a little bit, wasn't as much to my liking, but that's my own personal taste. But this is just great, raw-throated, fast, sincere, just pained, personal hardcore stuff. Ruiner is next. I had a 7-inch by these guys when they were around. I believe it's compiled on here. I heard these guys are assholes. I can actually confirm that they're not. I used to see these guys all the time. My friend's band, Black Sheep Squadron, played with them often. I toured with Black Sheep Squadron on a string of shows with these dudes. They were great guys. Their music, hadn't listened to them in so long and only really saw them live. It was hard for me to remember what they sounded like, but it's also, emotionally leaning, but not emo. Melodic at times, aggressive, like kind of hardcore stuff. Kind of gravel-throated, kind of singing. Great lyrics. Their singer is an MMA guy now. I believe he's wrestling professionally in mixed martial arts. So, good for him. Hope he's doing well. No Warning, Ill Blood. Another modern classic of 2000s hardcore. These guys were from Toronto, and they were pretty much the first example of, like, people that loved New York hardcore, classic New York hardcore, the sort of metallic, moshy, chunky, rhythmic sort of stuff like Breakdown and Madball and all those bands outside of New York that was kind of doing their own thing with that influence and modernizing a little bit and just making it like their own, basically. I mean, there were bands in Europe that were heavily influenced by the New York bands, but they were kind of like in their own sort of niche market. And not to take anything away from like Knuckle Dust or any of those bands, because those bands were great. But No Warning blew up. They were huge. They played all over the place. And they had kind of a short run, too. I think they were only around for maybe 3 or 4 years before calling it a day. They've since reformed. They did a second record after this that a lot of people bashed as like a new metal record. It's not really, but it's definitely a lot more melodic. And their brand new record that just came out is pretty damn good. It's pretty hard. But I just saw these guys for the first time. I never saw them when they were around. I saw them at the Middle East a few months before the whole like COVID thing ruined everything, and they're great. But if you like Madball especially and Breakdown, I'd say those are the two biggest influences on these guys, but with like a real modern for the time, but still like very bright, crisp, like strong production, really energetic, like punchy, youthful execution. Then we got Foundation, and I never really fucked with Foundation when they were around because there was another hardcore band called Foundation that were around in the 90s, and I had this kind of thing where I was like, no, there already was like a straight edge band called Foundation. Like, don't these guys do their homework? And it's like, you gotta realize, dude, like this is me talking to myself here, internal dialogue. You gotta realize, dude, the other Foundation were around in the early 90s. They did not that much. A lot of people haven't thought about them in a while. They were cool. Whole new generation of kids that might not know about it. So, get over it. And also the newer Foundation, this Foundation is way better. And I never gave them a shot, and that's kind of regrettable to me because they're super heavy. They're like a slightly more modern take on like the heavy hardcore that was more or less pioneered by Hatebreed and bands of that ilk. Another Victim and bands like that. Down-tuned a little bit, metal leaning, but not metal. One thing about Foundation is like there's no tough guy posturing. They've got good, smart, like sincere lyrics, and the song structures have a lot more thought behind them. I feel like it's not just writing mosh part for the sake of writing a mosh part so everybody can beat the shit out of each other. Granted, there's plenty of angry stuff on here, to get a pit going or whatever, but there's actual like songwriting, you know, and great lyrics as well. They were from the South, and before I get ahead of myself, this is called When the Smoke Clears. All this has been Bridge 9 stuff. Now, to get into some of the stuff Alexander sent me. This is a band called Nervo Chaos, Quarrel in Hell. This band's Brazilian, and they have a ton of records out. I'd never heard of them before, you know, little cursory spin through Metal Archives. I'm like, oh shit, a lot of stuff these guys put out, and it's good, solid death metal, straight up. Came out on Ibex Moon, just the dudes from Incantation's label there. Production's a little weird, guitars are a little quiet, and the snare's a little overly tuned up, it sounds like, but it's straightforward, you know, satanic death metal stuff. Not brutal for the sake of being brutal, but I'd say if you like stuff like Acheron and Vital Remains, like it's kind of along that with maybe a little bit more, slightly more Long Island-y kind of stuff as far as influences go, or stuff that it reminds me of. But yeah, good, solid death metal shit. Quarrel in Hell. Man. Yeah, I gotta work out something with this glare. Sorry, dudes. Australian band here. Destructor. I always mispronounce this. Opprobrium. Something about those fucking Australian guys, man. This is like, I want to say bestial in spirit, but not in sound. You know, it's very thrashy and precise, but it just has that explosive sort of feeling to it. Not unlike maybe some bands from like Singapore or something like that. You know, it's got that very like, maybe it's just that part of the world. I don't know what it is. But there's a lot of that like, sounding thrash riffs behind it. Fucking great. Really, really good satanic thrashy black metal shit. Outbreak, you make us sick. Dipping back into the Bridge 9 shit here. Outbreak were from Maine. I used to go see them all the time when I lived up there. Also, like, kind of a new thing for hardcore, taking like the, okay, let's play fast again. Let's bust out the Negative Approach 7 inches and, you know, maybe some Chromag stuff, early AF, but kind of with a modern guitar, like more like professional sounding guitar tone, I guess, like a la Bane and American Nightmare and bands like that. But like explosive, angry, yelling, short songs. Their shows were a riot up in Maine because it was everybody just flipping out. Super negative, you know, you're a waste, spit in your face, no one cares, you make us sick, brain dead, scum, don't need you, I blame you, useless, dead to me. You get the idea. Those are all song titles. Despite that, great guys, great bunch of guys. Chris from this band is in Terror now. Then we got For the Worse, local legend Mike McCarthy, who is a pro wrestler now, sang for this band. Again, like no frills, fast hardcore stuff. You know, a little bit more sense of humor on this than some of the other ones. There's some great song titles here. You Put the SS in Boss being one of my favorite ones. Reverse the Curse, you know, Boston. TV Zombies. Yeah, but You Put the SS in Boss pretty much takes the cake there. But Mike's one hell of a frontman. Kind of crazy Tasmanian devil sort of vocals. You can tell he likes Roger Murray, but he's not like necessarily doing an imitation or anything like that. Just a hint of metal with the riff structures. Dom, the guitarist, is a hell of a ripper. Played in some great bands. Good guy, too. Good shit. Think I Care. World Asylum. Last record put out by Think I Care. Think I Care was a band I liked a lot when they were around. They were around, I think, pretty much the entirety of the aughts. Maybe a little bit into the aught teens. But they started out as, like, heavily influenced by Infest and a lot of the West Coast power violence stuff, and sort of mixing it with maybe a little bit of like the really, really negative New York hardcore and like Boston, early 80s Boston hardcore. They were just this really vitriolic, like angry, deep-throated, deep-vocaled, like short, fast song. I wouldn't say bordering on grind, but that you could tell they like their fair share of Infest records and everything. As time went on, they got slower and moshier, more rhythmic, more of a sheer terror influence, more influenced by like the harder New York stuff. Maintained a little bit of speed, and this was the last thing they did, World Asylum, and I never really paid that much attention to this one. I liked everything else. I liked the Mongrel record. I liked the self-titled. Both the self-titled records are one of those bands. They have more than one self-titled record. All good shit. This is like the slowest and moshiest, but it's by no means like boring or slow really at all. It's more mid-paced, and it's fucking nasty. Pissed stuff. And very good. Dipping back into metal. The stuff that Alexander sent me. This is Diabolic Force with Praise of Satan. Believe this band is also from Brazil, but if not, I'll correct it. Diabolic Force. Yeah, this is like very, very much like a worship of all the quote-unquote first wave black metal stuff. Super raw and stripped down. Early Bathory, Hellhammer, first Celtic Frost record, maybe a little bit of Venom, maybe a little bit of Bulldozer, but very much like, the scrapey, shrieky kind of black metal vocals with like punkish riffing and pretty simplistic. Like a lot of stuff like this, like it occasionally gets a little boring, but for the most part, it's pretty fucking ripping. It's a good record. Kind of wish I'd heard of it before. Diabolic Force, Hell's Headbangers. Came out within the last 10 years, I'm pretty sure. Another Australian band, Coffin Lust, Manifestations of Inner Darkness, also on Hells. Real good band. I'd heard the name. There's so many bands with Coffin in the name these days, but I'm pretty sure I've heard it. Looks like this is a two-man project. Not sure when it came out. 2014. Real good, like creepy, foreboding, like HM2, buzzsaw kind of shit. A little bit doomier than a lot of the bands that kind of popularized this style, which I appreciate. Great guitar tone. Obviously they're drawing from a certain region of the world for inspiration, but they're doing a little something more with it, I feel like. Definitely for the fans of the Swedish stuff. This was a recommendation from Wordvert. This is totally switching things up a little bit here. This is New Kingdom. This is a hip-hop record from the mid-90s, and with as little as I know about hip-hop, I would have thought that it was more recent than that. It seems like really ahead of its time. The beats, hopefully I don't embarrass myself too much trying to describe this, but the beats had that kind of noisy, like weird, like stairwell basement dwelling sort of Wu-Tang Clan thing going on, but they're like way more noisy and weird and like chaotic. Really, really cool. Really, really cool vocal execution too. Good shit. Haven't even opened this. Still in the shrink because I've been listening to it on Bandcamp, so I haven't properly popped in the disc, which I will. Because what's the point of buying physical media if you're not going to play it, right? This is the Traffic Death discography. This is a band from the Midwest. This is 2 LPs and 2 7-inches on 1 CD. I just bought their first LP on vinyl, Don't Be a Projectile. And it's pretty good. Like, it's got some styles that are kind of meshing together that don't feel quite totally cohesive. The vocals are more or less like a Nine Shocks Terror, like yelling, screaming hardcore thing. Some of the music's a little bit more metal than that, a little bit more grind. I like it. It's pretty good, not bad. But the Dead End LP, the first tracks on this, are fucking blazing. They're way more like streamlined and like leaning more straight towards like a grind crust kind of thing. I really like it a lot. Lots of short songs, thrashy, crossovery crust grind kind of stuff. Gotta love any kind of references to skateboarding, of course, for me right now. Nutso for that shit all over again. And also bonus points for having your newest release first on the record. I don't know why, but the discography CDs, I'm a big fan of discographies, everything in one place, popping it in, poring over the thick booklet, reading about the releases, but like certain ones like the Suppression discography, the Charles Bronson one, where it starts off with the most like hard to listen to lo-fi recordings first. I mean, I'm a lazy fuck. Like, it's easy to just fast forward past them or whatever, but I just why not listen to the best stuff first? You know what I mean? I mean, oftentimes the last stuff they recorded isn't the best stuff, but anyways, I digress. Not sure what order this is in. Hopefully I didn't just stick my foot in my mouth. It all sounds great though. Forced Expression. This is the Forced Expression discography. Both of these were on Mortville, by the way. Mortville Noise, which is a Midwestern label. Forced Expression was a grind, power violence kind of band that Daryl Kahan was in, from Citizen's Arrest, formerly of Disma, Abba Zagoroth, Funebrum. A guy who did a big transition from hardcore into metal, the late 80s into the late 90s. All of his projects are good, from his first youth crew band to True Colors, I believe, up to everything he's done in metal in the past 10 years. This record's kind of in a cool sweet spot. I'm not sure exactly where in the timeline this is. I think it was late 90s into the early 2000s. I know State of Fear might have crossed over with it at some point. At any rate, Taste of Fear. State of Fear is Minneapolis band with Disrupt guys. Anyways, this rules. Short songs, fast, pretty grindy, pretty to the point. Some stuff leans a little bit more towards hardcore. Some stuff leans a little bit more to grind, but it's all really, really great. And finally, speaking of Alexander, he recommended these to me ages ago on Facebook, like at least 4 months ago or something. This band called Eviction that was around in Pittsburgh in the late 80s into the early 90s. I want to say I've heard of these guys, but at this stage in my life, like, my brain is gradually turning to oatmeal. I'm 42 years old. I've seen more jagged logos and, like, doomsday artwork than I could throw a stick at. I don't know what actually comes from the 80s and what's like a retro thrash thing these days. There's just so much. There's so much. But the point is that I'm glad I have these in my life because they're fucking awesome. This is just a great thrash metal band that kind of started out more as sort of a crossover band. And I'd say that, like, they owe just as much of their sound to, like, a metal punk, like, Motorhead inspired or Venom inspired, like leaning into like maybe an English Dogs kind of vibe, just as much as like a Crumbsuckers kind of vibe. They're sort of in between that. Real like deep vocals that do remind me of the Crumbsuckers vocalist there. And then on this one they get way heavier and lean more into like a thrash metal kind of thing with maintaining the punk edge somewhat. This is 2 demos, Struggle with Society and Who Will Win. And this is The World Is Ours with an H, Away. So it's 2 demos, and then this is a full length and a demo that was recorded after it. And it's solid all the way through, you know. This is like punk metal crossover leaning into thrash, straight up thrash, really fucking great. I try to remember the story with this full length. I think they were supposed to put this out on Death Records, but it didn't happen, if I'm remembering right. I'll have to look back into that. I'm not sure. But certainly worth looking into. The more and more I think about it and the older I get, the more I become fascinated more so with scenes like the Pittsburgh scene and the Chicago scene and Texas, like all these places in the States that like should have gotten more shine during their heyday than like Florida. Not to low rate Florida or Long Island or anything else, anywhere else that had strong metal scenes, but like, man, Chicago and Pittsburgh especially really have some gems. And that's my thoughts for the evening. So, I don't know, support your local retailer. Things are gradually opening up. Do your curbside pickup. Support your stores through Discogs, you know. Try to keep it positive during these times. That's all I got to say for now. Later.